Let me ask you a counterfactual question. It was the case that Michael Portillo came within a whisker of winning the leadership when Ian Duncan Smith actually got it. If he had, in fact, won, do you think the Tories would have pulled themselves together quicker, or was the party simply not ready then for that kind of medicine?
Well, I think you're right. I think the party wasn't ready for what Portillo was offering them. And there is some doubt as to whether Michael Portillo's position back in 2001 was exactly what it became later on. There would have been a risk as well electing Michael Portillo, because I think it would have caused quite a lot of internal disunity. Certainly a lot of activists would have been very unhappy about electing someone they didn't feel was really right for the Conservative Party, particularly on social issues. So I think the recipe that Michael Portillo had in 2001 and certainly by 2003 was probably the right one for the Conservative Party, and actually you can see a lot of what David Cameron has done in Michael Portillo, but it simply wasn't feasible for the party in 2001 to go with it. And unfortunately, perhaps it wasn't feasible for the party if it were associated with someone like Michael Portillo. If it had been associated at that stage with someone like David Cameron, then perhaps actually they could have pulled something off. But Michael Portillo posed particular problems, I think, for the Conservative Party.
I mean, would it be going too far to say that the party was singularly unfortunate in the individuals who were available for many years to bring about reform?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I mean, one of the problems in a way with being so badly beaten is, of course, it reduces a parliamentary party to a rump of people, which means actually you have very, very little choice, given that, you know, the person leading you has to be an MP, probably of a certain standing, has to be an MP who has a fairly safe seat, has to be an MP who doesn't have too many enemies. The number of people who actually fulfill those criteria is actually very small. And I guess one of the themes of the book is that high politics, if you like, is a very, very small world, which means that you don't really have many options when it comes to picking your leader. And therefore it's very, very easy, particularly if you rush into a leadership contest, to make a mistake.
I mean, you say repeatedly in the book that you're looking at the interplay between institutions, ideas, interests and individuals. But it seemed to me that individuals count for a very, very great deal in that equation.
Yes, I mean, I think they do. I mean, I'm very interested, obviously, as a social scientist in the institutional side and the organisational side of things. But I think, particularly, I guess, with the Conservative Party, which is so leadership dominated, individuals are going to matter. I mean, this is a party whose activists, you know, while they may feel very strongly about certain subjects, don't actually have much say on the policy of the party, and whose MPs and even whose shadow cabinet don't really have much control over the leader, to be honest. So everything stands and falls, particularly for the Conservative Party anyway, on what the leader does or isn't able to do.
Did the nadir come under Ian Duncan Smith? Was that the moment when the party touched bottom and the only direction to go was up?
Well, actually, a lot of my interviewees said that. In fact, one of them even suggested that Ian Duncan Smith had done the Conservative Party a favour by being such a poor leader, just as Michael Foot had done the Labour Party a favour in 1983 in some ways. Yes, I mean, I think that's right. I think in 2003 there really wasn't, you know, nowhere else for the party to go but to elect someone who was at least seen as competent and at least seen as a serious politician. But of course the irony in that and that decision to choose Michael Howard to replace Ian Duncan Smith was that it put them right back ideologically into the Thatcherite box or the Thatcherite corner into which they'd painted themselves already. It gave them absolutely no chance of any kind of ideological moderation. So while they had probably a competent leader, he still wasn't the right leader.
But it was nonetheless under Michael Howard that the Notting Hill set began to get its act together and become a force in the party. Yes,
and actually I think Michael Howard is a rather fascinating politician. Here's someone whose convictions are certainly Thatcherite, for want of a better description, but who is, I think, a very intelligent and actually a rather more engaging person than many people give him credit for. And I think that actually allowed him to see that although perhaps his own election campaign in 2005 wasn't going to be a kind of modernising campaign, that he would in the end have to promote people to come after him who would actually be able to change the party. And it was clearly Michael Howard's decision after the 2005 election not to resign immediately and to allow this kind of extended leadership contest to take place, which in effect produced the post-mortem that the party had never actually undertaken after 1997, which put the party back on the road to recovery.
You mentioned, Tim, the fact that the Conservative Party pulled itself together is not surprising because parties, eventually tend to. But the interesting thing was the speed with which that was accomplished. What do you think the main factors were in it happening quickly when it did actually happen?
I think the key to that is actually the nature of the Conservative Party itself and the institution of the Conservative Party. The fact that this is a very top-down party, which generally speaking, especially at the beginning of their reign, gives actually quite a lot of leeway to leaders. That means that if you pick the right person and that person has the right strategy, then you're going to be able to turn around that party fairly quickly. Now that's in marked contrast to a more democratic, if you like, organisation like the Labour Party, where there is much more ability on the part of people who disagree with the leader to slow down what he or she wants to do. So once the Conservative Party picked David Cameron, once it became obvious that David Cameron's strategy was probably a winning strategy, especially in the context of a Labour government which was beginning to tire of Tony Blair and elected Gordon Brown, then the turnaround was going to happen quite quickly.